Hey guys, tonight we slip into something uncomfortable. Not silk sheets or a warm blanket, but the echoing marble corridors of Caligula's palace, a place where the flicker of torchlight hides trembling shadows. You stand there, barefoot, the air thick with perfume and fear. The world outside Rome's walls hums with commerce and triumph. But in here, time moves differently, warped by whispers, cruelty, and the laughter of a man who calls himself a god. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And, as always, tell me your location and local time in the comments. It's fun to see where and when you re-listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk slowly across the mosaic floor, cool against your skin, and for a moment, it's easy to believe you've entered a temple, not a prison. The walls shimmer with gold leaf, the ceilings painted with gods and constellations. You could almost call it beautiful, if beauty weren't so dangerous here. Historians still argue whether Caligula's palace was truly as decadent as ancient writers claimed. But the stories that survive paint a portrait both dazzling and horrifying. Imagine being inside a world where every breath could be overheard by servants, spies, or even statues because rumor had it Caligula believed the marble busts of gods reported back to him. He wasn't just emperor, he was Rome's living fever dream, a man raised on prophecy, adored by the crowd, cursed by inheritance, the grandson of Augustus, the son of the heroic Germanicus. And yet, when he took the throne, something inside him cracked like overfired pottery. Power poured in, sanity leaked out. You feel it in the palace air, this unstable hum, like the vibration before an earthquake. Slaves hurry past you with eyes fixed on the floor. Their tunics whisper, their hands tremble. Each one is a story cut short, swallowed by service. You re one of them now, though you re not yet sure what you've been chosen for. A senator walks by, his sandals slapping the stone. He doesn't see you, you don't exist. In Rome, the emperor owns everything, even silence, especially silence. You hear laughter from the next room, that lazy, manic sound that only comes from people who know they can't be punished. Someone drops a goblet. It rolls across the floor and stops at your foot. The slave who dropped it freezes, eyes wide with terror. She doesn't dare move until a guard nods. Then she rushes to snatch it, nearly crying in relief. You realize that here, even clumsiness is a gamble with death. Historians still debate whether Caligula truly murdered for sport. They say he delighted in watching people squirm, that he tested loyalty by pushing it past the breaking point. In this palace, you learn early, it's not enough to obey. You have to entertain. At night, when the torches gutter low, you hear music from the upper halls, the emperor's private revels. The rhythm drifts down through the corridors, mingling with the sighs of the sleepless. It said Caligula demanded that even his slaves smile when they danced for him, and if they couldn't, he'd remind them that smiles are easier to wear than scars. You lean against a column, feeling its coldness seep into your back. You think of the life you once had, the market noise, the smell of olives, the warmth of sunlight on your skin, that feels impossibly far away now. In Caligula's world, past and future dissolve. Only this moment matters, this heartbeat this command. A curious fact: Roman palaces were not merely homes. They were symbols of divine order, architectural mirrors of the universe. Every hallway, every fresco was meant to remind you of your place beneath the emperor. So when Caligula redesigned his private quarters to connect directly with the temple of Jupiter, it wasn't just convenience, it was theology. He was blurring the boundary between man and God, and you, poor mortal, were part of his experiment. You wandered deeper into the palace, where marble statues of Venus and Apollo line the hallways. Their stone eyes seem to follow you, judgmental yet indifferent. Somewhere behind you, a man screams, one short, sharp sound, cut off too quickly. The guards don't even flinch. You flinch enough for both of you. You remind yourself, survive the night. Just survive the night. One historian once joked that Caligula's palace must have smelled like fear and roses, heavy perfume masking the rot beneath. You catch that same mixture now: wine, oil, and something metallic, like the breath before a storm. Somewhere above, the emperor laughs again. It's not a sound you'll forget. It's bright. You don't see him at first. You feel him. The sound of sandals on marble. The way everyone stops breathing at once. Then, from behind a curtain of silk, he appears, the emperor himself, Gaius, Julius, Caesar, Augustus, Germanicus. The world calls him Caligula. Little Boots, a nickname from his childhood when he followed his father's soldiers, wearing a tiny uniform. Cute, right? Well, the cute part ends here. He's smaller than you imagined, his body delicate and pale, but there's something electric about him, like standing too close to lightning. His eyes are wide and too bright. You can't tell if he's amused, furious, or both at once. He walks as if he owns not just Rome, but the air itself. Historians still argue whether Caligula was truly insane or just playing the part of madness to terrify his enemies. Maybe he didn't know the difference anymore. Maybe that was the point. Tonight, he's surrounded by laughter, senators, courtiers, dancers, all pretending not to notice that one wrong word could end their lives. You see him gesture toward a slave, pouring wine to slowly. The man freezes. Caligula tilts his head, smiles, and whispers something to a guard. The guard leads the slave away quietly. You don't hear a scream, but you don't see the man again either. That's the rhythm of his rule. Laughter, silence, disappearance. It's easy to forget, under all the horror stories, that Caligula began his reign, loved by everyone. He was young, handsome, the son of a war hero. Rome threw festivals for him. Statues rose overnight. Crowds shouted his name. They thought he'd be another Augustus. Instead, they got a storm trapped in human form. You listen as he speaks, softly, too softly, as if he's bored by the sound of his own power. He tells a story about the gods playing dice with mortals. People laugh at the right moments, but the laughter doesn't reach their eyes. You're beginning to understand. Here, joy is a performance. One scholar wrote that Caligula's favorite sport was contradiction, to give an order and then punish those who obeyed it. You suspect it's true. Earlier today, he banned purple clothing from his court because it was too royal tonight. He's wearing an entire cloak dyed imperial purple, shimmering like wet blood. You're standing by the wall when his gaze brushes over you. It's brief, less than a heartbeat, but enough to freeze you solid. You lower your eyes immediately. You know what happens to those who stare too long. Still, he laughs. New, aren't you? He says, voice lazy, almost kind. The room stills. You nod once, not trusting your mouth. He waves a hand. Smile. You do. It feels wrong. There, much better, he says, before turning away. Everyone exhales again. It's as if the entire hall had been underwater, waiting for permission to breathe. A historian once described Caligula as a man who tested the gods, and then became one. Maybe that S. What you rewatching a mortal, so consumed by adoration that he believes the universe owes him amusement. You learn that he enjoys paradoxes. He'll call himself merciful while ordering executions. He'll give gold to a beggar, then throw the man into the sea for spoiling the view. Every act is theater, every cruelty applause-worthy, and you, somewhere between servant and scenery, begin to grasp the awful truth. The emperor's madness is contagious. The people around him start copying his mannerisms, laughing too loud, complimenting his cruelty, finding poetry in pain. A senator even pretends to faint from joy when Caligula glances his way. It's absurd, it's terrifying, and it works, because survival here means matching his mood, even if that mood shifts like quicksilver. You hear a soft voice beside you, another slave, whispering in Latin. He can see your thoughts if you frown. You don't know if it's superstition or warning. Either way, you force another smile. Historians still debate whether Caligula truly believed himself divine or merely used religion to keep people off balance. But one thing is certain, he loved the illusion. He built temples to himself, demanded that sacrifices be made in his name, and ordered priests to recite prayers, calling him Jupiter's equal. Some even say he talked to the moon at night, asking for advice. You imagine that conversation, Caligula, robe half open, muttering to the sky while the rest of Rome pretends not to notice. It's almost funny, in a tragic, sleep-deprived sort of way. You wonder if the moon ever answered back. Behind the humor, though, is exhaustion. You can see it in his eyes. He's bored of perfection, bored of power, bored of mortals. And that boredom is dangerous. He rises suddenly, declaring that Rome has grown to silent. I want laughter, he shouts. Real laughter. The musicians scramble. Flutes and drums burst into frantic life. Dancers whirl across the floor, smiling with desperation. You realize this isn't joy. It's survival, disguised as celebration. One dancer slips, knees hitting marble. The room freezes. Caligula stares, then bursts into hysterical laughter. Ah, a gift from the gods, a comedy. He claps, delighted. The dancer forces herself to laugh, 2 tears in her eyes. He watches her for a moment longer, then says, take her to the baths. She'll dance again tomorrow. You've seen enough to know the baths means she won't. When the emperor finally leaves, the hall exhales as one living body. You stand there, heart pounding, wondering how long this strange play can continue before the stage itself collapses. Somewhere in the distance, thunder murmurs, or maybe that's applause. In Caligula's Rome, it's hard to tell the difference. You don't remember the exact moment you stopped being a person and became property. It happens quietly, the way daylight fades into dusk, too gradual to notice until it's too late. Maybe it began months ago, when Roman soldiers marched through your town. They didn't come for conquest, not exactly. They came for tribute, and tribute could mean gold, grain, or you. Historians still argue whether Caligula's slave markets were truly more brutal than his predecessors. But one thing's clear: during his reign, the buying and selling of human lives reached an art form. Traders competed to find the most exotic beauty, Greek, Egyptian, Nubian, Gallic, as if suffering were a luxury brand. You were lined up on a wooden stage beneath the Roman sun, dust stinging your eyes, salt from tears drying on your lips. The auctioneer bragged about your youth, your hair, your calm temperament. You stood there, frozen, pretending to be calm because fear didn't sell well unless it looked elegant. One senator lifted your chin with a finger, inspecting your teeth like a horse. Another laughed and asked if you could sing. You shook your head. He waved you off. The next bidder smiled faintly, a palace official, gold clasp at his shoulder. That's when your fate was sealed. You're not taken to the slave barracks, but to a villa overlooking the Tiber, where you're cleaned, perfumed, and dressed in linen that's softer than anything you've ever touched. It feels like kindness until you realize why it's necessary. You're being prepared for display, not as a servant, but as an ornament in the emperor's collection. You overhear the overseer boasting, "Caligula has a taste for variety. He believes beauty pleases the gods, so he gathers it." That word gathers stays with you. Flowers are gathered, so are sacrifices. At night, you're transported to the Palatine Hill, where the emperor's palace gleams like a mirage. Torches line the stairway. The smell of oil, marble dust, and incense mixes into something strangely holy. You're brought through the gates and handed over to guards who barely glance at you. From that moment on, your name is gone. You're a whisper in a corridor, a shadow at the emperor's feet. Historians still debate whether Caligula's private pleasure chambers truly existed, the so-called Domus Scutorum, or House of Harlots, where rumor said the emperor kept both nobles and slaves for his amusement. Suetonius wrote of it as a place where lust met politics, where even senators' wives were summoned without warning. Whether literal or exaggerated, the idea alone is enough to make your pulse quicken. Inside, the rooms are eerily quiet. There's no laughter here, no conversation, just the soft pad of feet, the faint music of a lyre somewhere beyond the wall. Every surface glows with wealth: bronze mirrors, silk drapery, mosaic floors that shimmer like fish scales. You'd think such beauty would soothe you. It doesn't. It feels like a trap made of art. A guard shows you to a chamber lined with curtains. There are no windows, only candles flickering in bronze bowls. He tells you to wait. You notice a strange detail. Each curtain is stitched with the imperial monogram, C.A. Caligula Augustus, ownership woven into fabric. The minutes stretch. You try to sit still, but your body betrays you. A twitch here, a shiver there. The silence grows so deep it feels like pressure. Then you hear laughter, muffled, close. The curtain stirs. Someone else is crying softly behind it. You remember something the overseer said earlier. In this palace, crying is bad manners. The emperor finds it unpleasant. You wonder if the person behind the curtain knows that yet. Historians still argue whether Caligula's slaves were allowed to speak freely when not on duty. Some accounts say they were treated like furniture, silent until summoned. Others suggest that he enjoyed their conversation, so long as they praised him. Either way, the rule is simple. Speak when spoken to, smile when stared at, vanish when dismissed. You start to understand the system now. It's not just about physical control, it's psychological. The emperor doesn't want obedience. He wants theater. He wants every movement to reflect his divine will, every sigh to sound rehearsed. And so, even the slaves begin to play their parts. You watch one girl pour wine as though it's a sacred ritual, her eyes hollow but graceful. A young man tunes a lyre with trembling precision. Each one moves like an actor in a tragedy that never ends. You try to copy them, posture straight, breathing shallow, face blank, but inside your mind races. You think of escape, of running to the streets, of disappearing into the crowd. Then you remember the chains you can't see but always feel. A curious fact: Rome's slave system had laws for everything, even punishment. A slave who struck a master could be executed by crucifixion. But in the emperor's palace, laws are decoration. Here, Caligula's mood is law. Sometimes you hear stories from the guards, half jokes, half warnings, about the slave who spoke out of turn and ended up serving as a living statue in the garden for 3 days. About the dancer who sneezed during a ceremony and was retired the next morning. You start laughing quietly at how absurd it all sounds. One of the guards hears you, raises an eyebrow, then laughs too. "That's the spirit," he says. "You'll last longer." That's joke number 1 of the night. And somehow, the cruelest, when you finally led to your sleeping quarters, a small room with no lock and no windows, you collapse onto the thin mattress. You're so tired, you don't even cry. You just stare at the ceiling and whisper a prayer to whatever gods still listen in this place. You don't know it yet, but tonight marks the beginning of your education, not in pleasure, but in fear. You trudge down the hallway again, this time fully aware that the so-called pleasure halls of the palace are nothing like the gossip made them out to be. From the outside, people imagine laughter and music, a life of indulgence. Inside, it smells like dust, sweat, and wax, with an undertone of something metallic that you hope isn't blood. The marble beneath your feet is icy, and every echo makes you jump. The walls are decorated with frescoes, gods entwined with mortals, scenes of celebration and torment interwoven so tightly you can't tell which is which. You stop for a moment and run your fingers over the smooth stone. It feels cold, almost accusatory, like the palace itself is watching you. Historians still argue whether the palace truly housed more than 1,000 slaves at a time, but the corridors you navigate seem endless. Every turn reveals another hallway, another chamber, another pair of eyes watching. You've learned quickly that even in the most lavish rooms, privacy is a myth. You pass the dining hall, a cavernous room with tables made of polished ivory and silver, platters of fruit, roasted meats, and exotic delicacies gleam under torchlight, but no one is eating freely. Slaves move silently, pouring wine with hands that tremble, while guests murmur polite laughter at the emperor's jokes. You realize that excess is just another form of control. Even indulgence has rules here. A fringe detail catches your eye. A servant balances on a raised platform, offering grapes while performing a complicated dance. If he stumbles, the punishment could be immediate: a slap, a push, or worse. And yet he smiles, a practiced mask. You catch yourself thinking about practicing your own mask. The whispers are everywhere, not just between slaves, but among courtiers. Rumors about assassinations, secret lovers, and the emperor's unpredictable whims ripple through the marble corridors. You overhear someone mention a banquet that ended with a guest thrown into the Tiber for insulting the art. You shiver, realizing that no wall is thick enough to muffle history's cruel jokes. Caligula's private chambers are the worst. Here, the air is scented with frankincense, but it doesn't cover the tension. The furniture gleams, the floors reflect every movement, and the emperor's favorite slaves are stationed at corners like living statues. Their eyes follow you, judging, warning, sharing silent stories. Historians still argue whether Caligula intentionally designed his palace to disorient and terrify, or if the layout was just impractical Roman excess. You don't care about the reasoning. What matters is that you never know which corridor leads to safety and which leads to calamity. You notice the faint, eerie laughter of the emperor echoing from a distance. Sometimes it rises suddenly, then vanishes as if it were a phantom. The sound makes the hallways feel alive, or maybe the palace itself is alive, feeding on fear, storing it in its stone veins. Every night you lie awake, listening to the distant splashes from the baths, the shuffle of feet in unseen corridors, the whispered commands of the guards. You dream of sunlight, but even in sleep, you wake at the slightest creak of a door. A quirky tidbit. Some writers suggest that Caligula had secret passageways connecting the entire palace to allow him to appear unexpectedly, like a ghost during any gathering. The idea that someone could be watching you from behind the walls turns every glance over your shoulder into an exercise in terror. You learn the hierarchy quickly. Eunuchs patrol, keeping other slaves in line. Guards who appear lazy are the ones most feared. They report directly to the emperor and wield discretion like a weapon. Each step you take must be measured. Each word you breathe must be deliberate. The pleasure halls aren't fun. They're classrooms. You're learning lessons the hard way, obedience, subtlety, and how to disappear in plain sight. You pass a room where two slaves are performing music, but their eyes are wide, darting toward a shadow at the doorway. A mistake could cost them dearly. You remind yourself to be invisible. A historian once speculated that Caligula used the palace's architecture as psychological warfare, making slaves feel constantly observed even when they weren't. You believe it. Every mirrored corridor, every echo, every torch seems designed to keep you on edge. The palace is beautiful, and it is terrifying. You realize that luxury here is a weapon, opulence, a cage, and every sparkle of marble a reminder of your smallness. You swallow hard, straighten your shoulders, and continue walking. Survival demands it, even as the palace itself seems to hum a warning beneath your feet. You learn quickly that in Caligula's world, humiliation is more dangerous than steel. It's everywhere, disguised as games, rituals, or innocent laughter. One day, you carry a tray of wine and trip over a marble step. The goblets crash, shattering like glass fireworks. The room goes silent. Your heart pounds. And then the emperor laughs. Not a polite chuckle, a sharp, mocking cackle that echoes off the walls like a predator's roar. "Ah, my new jewel," he says. eyes glinting, graceful as always. The words feel like a knife wrapped in silk. You bow so low, you nearly kiss the floor. Historians still argue whether public humiliation was an intentional tool of control in Roman palaces or a byproduct of Caligula's personal sadism. Either way, it is clear, if you are not constantly performing, you are in danger. You notice the reactions around you. Courtiers stiffen. Other slaves avert their eyes. The laughter of your peers is tight, forced. You realize survival is not about avoiding mistakes. It's about surviving the mistakes you inevitably make. One fringe tale, whispered among the corridors, involves a senator forced to crawl across the marble hall wearing a mask of a donkey. Apparently, Caligula found the combination of dignity and ridicule irresistible. You wonder if the story is true and shiver at the possibility that similar games might await you. Sometimes the emperor's tricks are subtler. A mispronounced word, a poorly executed bow, a hesitation while serving each could result in what he calls educational theatrics. You watch as a guard yanks a trembling servant forward and instructs her to recite a poem about the emperor's divine brilliance. She stammers, and the laughter that follows is both admiration and mockery. You cringe, imagining yourself in her place. You trudge further down the hall, noticing the faint scent of rose oil and candle wax. The smell doesn't comfort, it taunts. It's the perfume of power and danger. Every step you take is a performance, and every misstep is fodder for Caligula's amusement. Curiously, some slaves report that he also enjoyed improvised comedy. If someone reacted creatively, even under duress, he might reward them with a fleeting smile or a scrap of favor. But the margin for error is razor thin. One wrong glance, one delayed response, and you become part of the evening's spectacle. You hear a door creak and peek inside a side chamber. A slave is kneeling, forced to recite the names of all the emperor's guests backward. He falters. Caligula's laughter explodes, filling the room like a storm. You hide your own rising fear behind a shallow, polite smile. Lesson learned. Anticipation is as important as obedience. Historians still argue whether Caligula deliberately mixed punishment and entertainment to desensitize his audience, or if it was simply his personal eccentricity amplified by palace excess. The outcome is the same. Watching someone suffer is now considered amusement. You remind yourself to blend in, to disappear into the shadows, to never, ever draw attention. Even the guards aren't safe from humiliation. One day, a eunuch stumbles while carrying a tray of wine. The emperor laughs, instructs him to spin in circles, then bow to everyone in the room. The eunuch complies, face red as a fire, and the court laughs in chorus. You want to laugh too, but your lips stay sealed. Fear tastes bitter. Sometimes you catch yourself imagining how it would feel to defy him, to stare back, to refuse the theater. Then a thought creeps in. That kind of courage has a cost. You've heard stories of slaves who dared only to vanish, never mentioned again in the annals of the palace. A quirky tidbit floats in your mind. Some of Caligula's more outrageous humiliations involved pets. He once forced a senator to feed his favorite horse grapes while singing a hymn. The absurdity is almost funny, except you know the message. No one is safe from ridicule. regardless of status. By the time night falls, you realize that survival is more than obedience. It's mimicry, vigilance, and timing. You are learning the unspoken rules of a game no one survives perfectly. And as you collapse onto your thin mattress, you feel a mix of exhaustion and dread, knowing tomorrow will bring another lesson in public display, fear, and the ever-blurring line between entertainment and punishment. You trudge toward the dining hall, where Caligula's feasts are less about nourishment and more about spectacle. Torches flicker over silver platters, making the golden fruit gleam like jewels. The smell of roasted meats mingles with incense and the faint tang of iron in the air. You try to ignore the scent of fear that hangs heavier than the aromas of the feast itself. Historians still argue whether Caligula truly hosted meals that lasted entire days filled with exotic foods and eccentric demands, or whether the tales are exaggerated to make him seem more deranged. Either way, the image that survives is unforgettable. A room where excess is so extreme, it's terrifying. You stand at the edge of the hall, carrying wine to the emperor. Dancers twirl near the tables, their smiles tight, their eyes nervous. A servant balances a tray of figs on one hand, while another quietly whispers a prayer under his breath. You join the chorus of silent performers, each of you part of the emperor's living tableau. A quirky tidbit: Caligula reportedly once served a meal on a floating ship in the middle of a large pool. Guests were instructed to eat gracefully while trying not to tip the vessel. The absurdity is almost comical if it weren't real. You feel a shiver imagining yourself teetering on that vessel, every move scrutinized, every misstep punished. Tonight's feast is more subdued by Caligula's standards, but still unnerving. You see courtiers nervously raise goblets of wine, waiting for the emperor's approval. A slave stumbles, and a whisper spreads like wildfire. Watch her. You sense that eyes are everywhere in the chandeliers, under the tables, behind curtains. Survival is about anticipation, not reaction. You watch Caligula recline, his purple robe shimmering like liquid sunset. He gestures for a servant to pour him wine. The man does so with shaking hands. Caligula takes a sip, then smirks. Too cold, too warm. Again, you stifle a sigh. Even the temperature of wine is a test here. Historians still debate whether Caligula's meals were private indulgences or deliberately theatrical events meant to impress and terrify simultaneously. You understand it intuitively. Every moment is theater, every gesture a test, and everyone present is part of the performance. You notice a servant nervously balancing a silver tray of dates. He slips slightly. Caligula laughs, a sound that could be wind or thunder, and snaps. Do it again. Perfectly this time. The man's hands quiver violently, yet he complies, knowing failure is unthinkable. You see alliances forming among the slaves, quiet glances, subtle gestures, shared jokes that the emperor cannot overhear. Whispers in Latin like, "Don't smile too much, don't frown too long." You join the unspoken code, learning which signals to read, which to ignore. The feast stretches on. Exotic foods arrive, some cooked in ways you've never imagined. You taste a fruit that smells like honey, but tastes like bitter metal. A dish of dormice, spiced and roasted, is passed around. You notice that each item is both nourishment and trap. Someone will spill, someone will hesitate, someone will earn the emperor's laughter or wrath. A fringe account mentions that Caligula sometimes had slaves compete for his amusement, presenting their own dishes, crafted from whatever they could find. The winner might receive a favor, the loser could vanish for days. You re-glad, you re-not part of that contest tonight, but it serves as a reminder that creativity here is dangerous, not freeing. Between courses, musicians play soft, eerie melodies. You notice a pair of slaves exchanging nervous smiles. The rhythm of the music seems to sync with your heartbeat. You realize you are being trained in timing, composure, and subtlety, whether you like it or not. Historians still argue whether Caligula's culinary indulgences were excessive decadence or political theater. From your perspective, there's no difference. Survival and spectacle are inseparable. You finish your part of the service, your arms aching from trays, your mind racing with the calculations of what is acceptable and what is not. Outside, the city of Rome hums obliviously. Inside, the emperor dines, plays, punishes, and teaches, and you, caught in the middle, learn that even a meal can be deadly. You notice them first in the quiet corners, where shadows cling and the flicker of torchlight barely reaches. The women who know too much, they move softly, exchanging glances and whispered words. At first, you think it's gossip, harmless chatter to pass the hours. But soon you realize these whispers carry power, knowledge, and danger in equal measure. Historians still argue how organized, if at all, these networks among palace slaves were. Some suggest they were tight-knit cells for survival, while others think connections were fleeting, fragile, and constantly threatened by betrayal. Whatever the truth, you learn quickly. Information is currency, and in Caligula's palace, it can be as protective as a weapon. You're invited, cautiously, into their circle, not by choice, but necessity. You learn the rules immediately. Speak in code, trust only when absolutely certain, and never, ever laugh at the wrong joke. The first secret you hear is simple. The emperor does not see everything, but he senses everything. You repeat it quietly in your mind, like a prayer. A quirky tidbit floats in your memory. One of the women claims she once overheard Caligula conversing with a chicken, insisting it held advice from the gods. She swears it's true, and you almost laugh until you remember that laughter can be noticed, recorded, and punished. By sharing what they know, these women create invisible maps of the palace. Who is loyal, who is likely to vanish, which corridors lead to safety, and which hide surprise inspections. They whisper about feasts where servants were forced to perform ridiculous tasks, about guests who were publicly shamed for minor slights, and about the emperor's ever-changing moods. You learn that his benevolence can vanish in a heartbeat, replaced by whimsy-fueled cruelty. One woman pulls you aside. Her hands are pale, her nails bitten down to the quick. "Listen," she says, voice low and urgent. "If you are noticed, if you stand out, you will be broken. Not physically, perhaps, but mentally." They call it the palace's teaching. You nod, feeling the weight of her words settle like stones in your chest. Historians still debate how much these whispers influenced palace politics. Were they true strategies for survival, or merely psychological comfort in a place designed to strip you of agency? You realize the difference is moot. If the whisper helps you survive another day, it is true enough. You follow her through hidden hallways, noticing the small signals she uses to indicate danger. A foot turned a certain way, a hand brushing a column, a glance toward a tapestry. Every motion is part of the silent language the slaves have developed over years of fear and observation. You start to mimic them, feeling both empowered and terrified. Through the nights, the women tell stories, some factual, some bordering on myth, about Caligula's guests, bizarre feasts, and sudden disappearances. One story lingers in your mind: a noblewoman, supposedly forced to dress as a statue for days, standing silently while the emperor's court whispered and laughed. The woman's secret survived only because a slave risked smuggling her food. You imagine yourself in her place, and your stomach twists. These alliances also provide moments of levity, tiny glimpses of humanity in a palace designed to erase it. You share jokes under your breath, careful to smother any laughter that might carry. They show you how to survive, not just physically, but psychologically, by maintaining small acts of control: a whispered joke, a concealed smile, a mental escape into memory or imagination. A fringe observation surfaces. Some historians suggest Caligula encouraged secret alliances among slaves, believing that it would make their obedience more entertaining, like watching chess pieces plotting against one another while he enjoys the game from above. Whether true or not, the effect is the same. Knowledge equals power, and secrecy is survival. By the time the evening candles burn low, you understand the invisible web that holds the palace together. Knowledge, caution, and subtlety are your only weapons, and in the quiet, fleeting moments when the emperor's laughter fades, you feel a fragile sense of camaraderie. With these women who know too much, allies in the shadows, guardians of survival, in a house designed to erase all hope, you trudge toward the baths, your feet echoing softly on marble floors that gleam under torchlight. The palace baths are said to be a sanctuary, a place to cleanse the body and mind. But here, even water carries danger. Steam rises in lazy tendrils, masking corners where guards linger, and whispered commands float like invisible strings. Historians still argue whether the emperor's baths were meant purely for luxury or as another arena for control. Either way, the pools glimmer with the sheen of gold-tiled floors, and the air smells faintly of rose oil, sweat, and something more metallic that tightens your chest. You notice a fringe detail. Some accounts claim Caligula filled the pools with seawater transported from the Mediterranean, insisting it made the water divine. It's probably true, you think, because here nothing is ordinary. Everything has a purpose beyond the obvious. As you step closer, you see slaves maneuvering between pools, balancing trays of scented oils and towels. Their movements are precise, rehearsed, a dance born of fear. One misstep could result in public embarrassment or worse. You remember the lesson from the dining hall. Even a stumble can become a spectacle. A guard whispers to you in Latin, "Keep your eyes down." Even a glance at the wrong person can cost you more than pride. You obey instantly, feeling the weight of invisible eyes. Even when the emperor is absent, the palace itself seems to observe, storing every movement, every hesitation. Caligula himself emerges suddenly, his presence like a ripple through water. The steam curls around him, as if the air itself bends in his favor. He is half draped in a towel, half in sunlight, spilling through a high window. You catch your breath, realizing that the sight of him is meant to awe and unsettle. Historians still argue whether Caligula used these baths for personal indulgence or to display absolute dominance. Either way, you notice the pattern. The palace is never neutral. Every pleasure is a test, every luxury a trap. He gestures at the water. Swim, he commands, casually. You glance around. The pools shimmer invitingly, but fear pins you to the edge. The emperor's eyes flit over the room, noting each face, each posture. You know he isn't observing you just for beauty. He is observing for submission, for reaction, for entertainment. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some sources suggest Caligula sometimes had slaves race through the baths, carrying candles, creating a chaotic spectacle of light and water. You imagine the clatter, the screams, and the laughter that follows, and shiver. The absurdity is almost funny if it weren't real. As the evening stretches on, the baths become a theater. Slaves perform tasks as if rehearsing a play they never wanted to join. You pour oils, balance trays, and keep your head low. Every action is scrutinized, every misstep remembered. The water reflects more than faces. It mirrors fear. You notice a young slave tremble near the edge of the main pool. One wrong movement, and he could slip, fall, or attract attention. The emperor notices, laughs, and applauds, not with kindness, but with the sharp edge of amusement. You feel your stomach knot. Lesson learned. The smallest error here can be amplified into a performance. Historians still debate whether such spectacles were meant to entertain only the emperor or to reinforce hierarchy and obedience among all in the palace. From your perspective, the distinction barely matters. Survival is obedience. Survival is invisibility. Survival is learning the art of moving through the marble maze without drawing notice. By the time the baths empty, you feel drained in a way water cannot soothe. Your muscles ache from service. Your mind strains under constant vigilance. And the memory of every laugh, every glance, every command lingers like a shadow. And yet, in that dim, scented space, you also learn resilience, the ability to breathe, move, and exist even under the heaviest gaze. You trudge toward the private gardens, where marble statues and fragrant flowers create the illusion of serenity. Sunlight filters through olive trees, dappling the ground with shifting patterns. It's quiet here, almost peaceful, but the palace has taught you that quiet is never safe. Every shadow could hide a guard, a whispering courtier, or the emperor himself. Historians still argue whether Caligula intentionally designed these gardens to unsettle visitors or simply indulged in lavish landscaping. Either way, walking here feels like navigating a minefield disguised as paradise. You notice a fringe detail. The emperor allegedly had mechanical birds and small fountains rigged to startle slaves who lingered too long. Some say the birds squawked welcome, full in a surprisingly human cadence. You try not to shiver at the thought, imagining your own heartbeat echoed back in feathers and water. Slaves tend to the plants with meticulous care, trimming, watering, and arranging flowers to please an emperor who notices the slightest imperfection. One mistake, a bent branch, a leaf out of place, could trigger laughter or scolding. You move cautiously, hands light, steps measured, mind acutely aware of every ripple of movement. Caligula appears suddenly at the garden's edge, wearing a laurel crown and a flowing purple robe that catches the sunlight like liquid. He surveys the grounds, humming a tuneless melody, then points at a statue. "That one," he says, voice low but sharp, "needs more attention. Make it perfect, or else it suffers." You glance at the statue, an elegant Venus, and wonder if the punishment applies metaphorically, or if someone will take the lesson literally. Historians still debate whether Caligula's obsession with statues and art was about aesthetics, power, or psychological domination. Walking among the marble figures, you realize it docents he matter. Every object in the garden serves as a reminder that you exist to please, to perform, to survive. A quirky tale floats in your mind. One evening, the emperor allegedly had a group of slaves dress as animals and perform a mock hunt for his amusement, while courtiers observed and laughed. The absurdity of the scene, docenti, make it less terrifying. It reinforces that nothing is predictable, nothing is safe. You notice subtle signs of alliances. Again, two women exchange glances near a fountain, silently communicating which areas are watched and which are momentarily free. You feel grateful for these small networks, knowing they are fragile yet vital. As you move along the marble paths, you step lightly over creeping vines and scattered petals. Each movement feels rehearsed, a dance choreographed by fear. One misstep, a crushed flower, a misplaced hand, could draw attention. You remember the lesson from the baths. Survival is the art of perfect invisibility. Caligula wanders closer, eyes bright, inspecting flowers as if each bloom were a person. He pauses, touches a rose, then waves a hand dismissively. A nearby slave nearly collapses with relief. You sense the tension radiating like heat from the marble floor. Historians still argue whether these garden strolls were moments of introspection for the emperor or elaborate performances designed to instill awe and terror simultaneously. Whatever the case, the effect is the same. You walk with caution, calculating, watching, surviving. A subtle breeze carries the scent of jasmine and oil. You take a breath, letting the fragrance fill your lungs, reminding yourself that even beauty can coexist with danger, sometimes just enough to keep you sane. And as the sun dips lower, painting the marble gold, you realize that in this palace, paradise and peril are inseparable, and your steps must always reflect that truth. You trudge down the narrow corridors toward the Imperial Library, a place that smells of parchment, wax, and something older, almost like dusted bones. Here, unlike the baths or gardens, knowledge and fear coexist in quiet, almost sacred tension. The shelves stretch skyward, stacked with scrolls, tablets, and codices that promise wisdom, though you suspect much of it is propaganda meant to glorify Caligula and erase inconvenient truths. Historians still argue whether Caligula himself read much of the material in his library, or if the collection was merely another stage prop, a way to project erudition while reinforcing authority. You not sure which is more terrifying, a ruler who knows everything or one who only needs the appearance of knowing. As you navigate the aisles, you notice the meticulous organization of the space. Scrolls are rolled and tied in exacting symmetry, tablets arranged by weight and subject. Even the smallest misalignment could draw a sharp look from the eunuchs overseeing the library. You straighten a misfolded scroll reflexively, heart hammering in the echoing silence. A fringe detail lingers in your mind. One chronicler claimed that some slaves were tasked with whispering the contents of the most scandalous scrolls directly into Caligula's ear, while he lounged, creating a constant stream of secrets and gossip for the emperor's amusement. The thought sends a chill down your spine. Information here is both power and peril. You're led to a small reading alcove, where the emperor occasionally reviews texts while surrounded by his closest attendants. The alcove is low lit, warm with oil lamps, and filled with the faint rustle of parchment. You realize quickly that even here, your movements are being judged. You adjust your posture, making yourself small, quiet, almost invisible. Caligula enters suddenly, robes trailing, eyes scanning the shelves. "Arrange them properly," he commands, pointing vaguely. The task seems simple, yet the implication is anything but. Mistakes are interpreted as defiance, inefficiency, or a personal affront. You obey meticulously, knowing the smallest misplacement could ripple into a consequence far beyond your understanding. Historians still debate how much intellectual engagement the emperor genuinely had versus how much he relied on appearances. You don't care about their conclusions. Here, learning is survival. Observation is safety. Knowledge is camouflage. While you straighten a particularly tall stack of scrolls, you overhear a conversation between two eunuchs about the emperor's most recent indulgences. One recounts a banquet where a guest was forced to recite poetry while balancing plates on his head. Another about a slave who was made to wear a mask and act as a human statue for days. You note the patterns, storing them in your mind like maps of danger. A quirky moment breaks the tension. A small bird has somehow flown into the alcove, landing atop a stack of scrolls. You watch it flutter, and for a moment your pulse eases. The bird's freedom feels alien here, almost magical. You remember the fringe story that Caligula loved birds as symbols of omens and prophecy. Perhaps this one will go unnoticed, or perhaps it's a message you don't dare guess. By mid-afternoon, the alcove fills with the emperor's favored attendants. They move like living chess pieces, each step calculated, each gesture scrutinized. A single misstep in posture or eye contact could make you the subject of the next whispered story, or worse, the next spectacle. You glance at the scrolls, reading snippets of poetry, legal decrees, and philosophical musings. One verse about fate strikes you. Even in chains, the mind may fly, though the body bends. You tuck it away mentally. A small seed of defiance, a fragment of hope that perhaps even here, in this house of fear and excess, thought can be free. Historians still argue whether Caligula encouraged literacy among his slaves to enhance control or simply ignored it. You realize it doesn't matter. Knowledge has become a survival tool, a shield against arbitrary punishment, a secret lifeline amidst the grandeur and terror. The emperor reclines on a cushioned bench, reading a scroll aloud. You are tasked with bringing him ink and parchment. Your hands tremble, but your face is calm. One wrong movement could be fatal, or at least memorable enough to haunt you for weeks. You hand him the materials, precisely as expected. He glances briefly, then waves you off, a gesture both dismissive and approving. You exhale quietly, aware that today, at least, you have survived unnoticed. The quiet of the library is deceptive. Outside, the palace thrums with life, laughter, and the faint hum of fear. You understand that this sanctuary of scrolls is another arena. Every glance, every whisper, every step here is part of a complex ballet of obedience, vigilance, and subtle survival. You take a slow breath and realize the lesson of the library. Knowledge is power, even in chains. Observation is safety. Memory is armor. And, most importantly, invisibility is a skill as vital as any you could wield in the gardens, baths, or dining halls. By evening, as the emperor departs and the halls grow quiet, you sit on a low stool, rolling a scroll between your fingers. Each line seems heavier now, carrying not just words, but warnings, histories, and secrets. You recognize that even in the grandeur of Caligula's palace, survival demands intellect as much as obedience, and sometimes the smallest detail, a carefully remembered fact, a subtle glance, a hidden story, can mean the difference between life and disappearance. You trudge into the quieter service corridors, where the echoes of the grand halls are replaced by the soft shuffle of other slaves. Here, behind the marble and gold, survival is as much about reading human behavior as it is about following orders. Every glance, every whispered word, every shift in posture could be a clue to what comes next. Historians still argue whether Caligula relied on fear or fascination to maintain control over his household. From your perspective, the distinction is almost irrelevant. Every day is a lesson in anticipating his whims before they become commands. A fringe tidbit floats through your mind. Some chroniclers claim that Caligula kept a secret chamber filled with mirrors angled to watch multiple hallways at once. So, even when he wasn't physically present, his gaze was inescapable. The thought makes your skin crawl. You imagine 1,000 invisible eyes following every step, recording every falter. You pause near a corner and watch a group of eunuchs moving a large tapestry. One of them frowns, apparently unsure how to drape it correctly. The subtle shift in expression is noted instantly by a passing guard who snaps a reprimand. The tapestry falls slightly, and the eunuchs straighten quickly, nodding silently. The lesson is clear. Perfection is expected, even in trivial matters, and the smallest error can carry consequences. The air here is cooler, scented faintly with oils and damp stone. You notice a slight draft carrying distant laughter and the faint clang of goblets, reminders that the palace is never truly quiet. You feel the tension in your shoulders, the taut awareness that survival here requires constant vigilance, not only of your actions, but of the actions of everyone around you. You hear a low whisper from a fellow slave. Watch the guards, not the emperor. Sometimes he's the easier one. You nod silently, understanding the wisdom behind the words. While Caligula's presence is terrifying, the intermediaries, the eunuchs, guards, and attendants can be unpredictable and sometimes more dangerous than the emperor himself. Historians still debate how much autonomy palace slaves truly had, or if every choice was an illusion. Here, you realize autonomy is measured in milliseconds. When to step aside, when to speak, when to breathe. Timing is survival, and memory is a weapon. A quirky tidbit crosses your mind. Some slaves reportedly used coded knocks and subtle signals to alert each other of the emperor's sudden appearances. You try to memorize these signals, knowing that being the first to notice can mean the difference between humiliation and unnoticed survival. You trudge past the kitchens, catching the smell of roasting meat mingled with spices so potent they almost mask the underlying odor of sweat and fear. Slaves move in silence, carrying trays and tending fires, their movements choreographed by necessity. Even here, a minor misstep, spilling a dish, dropping a utensil, or failing to notice the emperor's presence, could result in public admonishment. Caligula sometimes appeared unexpectedly, strolling into the kitchen's mid-preparation, testing the patience and composure of the staff. You recall a story of a cook who, startled by the emperor's entrance, dropped a steaming dish. The emperor laughed, but the cook spent the next hour balancing spoons and bowls in silent punishment. You swallow a shiver, imagining yourself in that scenario. Historians still argue whether these sudden inspections were designed for amusement, intimidation, or both. You decide it's safer not to ponder motives. Observation and adaptation are far more practical skills here. You pause at the entrance to a service stairwell where a tiny alcove allows for a hidden vantage of the upper halls. From here, you glimpse the grand corridors above, servants moving like shadows, courtiers oblivious or carefully performing, and the occasional glimpse of Caligula's robe trailing along the marble. The view is both reassuring and terrifying. You can see, but you know you can also be seen. As night falls, the corridors become a labyrinth of soft echoes and shifting torchlight. You memorize patterns, the way a guard pauses before entering a room, how a servant positions a tray, the subtle timing of a closed door. These details, small as they are, become mental maps, survival strategies, and secret weapons. A quirky moment of levity occurs when a young slave, balancing a stack of plates, slips slightly. He recovers without a sound, and the small group nearby suppresses laughter, a tiny, shared victory against the oppressive tension. You smile faintly, appreciating the resilience found in minor successes. By the end of your shift, you realize the corridors are more than passageways. They are lessons in anticipation, caution, and psychological agility. Here, you learn that survival is never passive. It is a constant, conscious performance, an ongoing negotiation with fear, observation, and the unpredictable currents of the emperor's whims. You trudge toward the chambers reserved for Caligula's private entertainments, the faint scent of incense and wax curling round your senses like a warning. The corridor narrows, and your footsteps echo differently here, softer, more cautious, as if the palace itself is reminding you that this is where the stakes are highest. Historians still argue whether the emperor's private entertainments were purely personal indulgences or deliberate exercises in power display. Either way, you understand that nothing happening here is trivial. Every event is a study in dominance, obedience, and spectacle. A fringe tidbit surfaces in your memory. One chronicler claims Caligula sometimes instructed slaves to participate in impromptu theater, improvising stories while wearing masks or costumes, blending comedy with subtle humiliation. The account seems almost too absurd to be true, and yet that's precisely why you cannot dismiss it. You notice the layout: velvet drapes, polished floors, and intricate mosaics designed to dazzle the eye. Every detail seems intentional, calibrated to keep everyone on edge. Even the furniture appears to have been placed to maximize visibility. ensuring no one can hide. You realize your every movement is now under subtle scrutiny. Caligula enters, trailing a robe shimmering with gold thread. He hums a tuneless melody, his presence instantly shifting the atmosphere. Laughter from unseen corners ripples softly, and you know that the emperor is testing reactions, not only from slaves, but from courtiers and attendants alike. Historians still debate whether Caligula's unpredictable behaviors were sheer madness or a deliberate tool of psychological control. You feel it keenly. In this room, uncertainty is as dangerous as any sword. A misstep in posture, gaze, or speech could turn amusement into reprimand in an instant. A quirky moment catches your attention. A servant balancing a small tray of oil lamps accidentally tips one slightly. Flames flicker dangerously close to the carpet. Instead of punishment, Caligula bursts into laughter and applauds the recovery. The lesson is paradoxical. Excellence under pressure is rewarded, but imperfection is magnified for entertainment. You watch carefully as courtiers perform subtle rituals to curry favor, while slaves move like shadows, mindful of every flick of the eye and twitch of the hand. You note patterns, which gestures earn approval, which avoid attention, and which are outright dangerous. Survival requires learning the invisible grammar of these moments. Historians still argue whether Caligula's entertainments encouraged cunning among slaves and courtiers, or merely showcased his unpredictable cruelty. Your own observations suggest both. Cleverness offers temporary safety, but unpredictability is the true master. You pass by a large mosaic depicting a mythological scene, a god punishing mortals for minor misdeeds. You glance at the figures, frozen in stone, and feel an eerie resonance. The mosaic seems less decoration and more warning. Perfection is demanded, and mistakes echo eternally. You are tasked with serving refreshments, balancing delicate trays while observing the room. A spilled drop could become a performance, a misstep amplified into a story told for weeks. You steady your hands, focus your gaze, and move with calculated care. A fleeting sense of humor lightens the tension. A small bird has found its way into the chamber, hopping along the floor. No one seems to notice, and you imagine the chaos it could cause if it disturbed the emperor's entertainment. The absurdity is a tiny relief, a mental joke whispered quietly to yourself. By the time the night stretches long and the candles burn low, you realize this chamber is a microcosm of the palace itself. Luxury, danger, and performance intertwine so tightly that you can't separate them. The lesson is clear. Survival depends on mastering not just obedience, but perception, timing, and the delicate art of anticipating human behavior in the face of whimsy and power. You trudge through the narrow service passage leading to the imperial stables, where the smell of hay, sweat, and horses mixes with the faint metallic temps of nearby armories. This is a world apart from the opulence of the dining halls and baths. Yet the same rules of survival apply: vigilance, anticipation, and perfect composure. Historians still argue whether Caligula's obsession with horses was personal passion or political symbolism. You suspect it's both, since even the animals are part of his theater of control. Each stall is meticulously arranged, and the slightest misstep, a misaligned saddle, a dropped bridle, could draw the emperor's attention and his amusement or scorn. A quirky detail comes to mind. Caligula famously adored his horse Incitatus so much that he allegedly planned to make it a consul. You can help but picture a marble hall with a horse sitting in a seat of political power, and a faint smile crosses your lips despite the tension. If only it weren't so terrifyingly plausible here. You move among the animals, brushing coats and arranging tack, while your senses remain alert to sounds beyond the expected. The shuffle of hooves on stone, the soft whisper of a guard's sandals, and the ever-present possibility of the emperor's sudden appearance. You learn to breathe quietly, step lightly, and speak only when necessary. Historians still debate whether Caligula's treatment of his stables and animals was eccentric indulgence or deliberate display of power. From your perspective, it doesn't matter. Every part of the palace, from marble floors to straw-filled stalls, is a stage for performance, and your survival depends on reading the cues accurately. A servant drops a brush near the emperor's favorite horse, and you witness the instant tension. The animal shuffles nervously. A guard frowns, and the emperor's laugh echoes somewhere beyond the hall. That single sound carries weight, a reminder that amusement and punishment often share the same voice. You notice that alliances between slaves extend even here. Subtle glances communicate which horses are temperamental, which stalls hide hazards, and which corridors are safe to pass when the emperor's patrol moves through. Knowledge becomes armor, a silent shield against arbitrary consequence. A fringe anecdote floats in your mind. Some claim that Caligula once invited senators to dine in the stable, seated amid straw and animals, to humiliate them and demonstrate his dominion. You shiver at the thought, imagining human dignity reduced to fodder in the same way horses are fed. You spend hours tending to the horses, observing subtle signs of agitation, learning their rhythms, and memorizing patterns of care. The emperor's expectations are both precise and whimsical. Brushes must be aligned, water bowls filled just so, and the animals groomed to perfection while performing their own subtle dance of compliance. Historians still argue whether this obsession with horses reflected a deeper psychological need for control, or simply a fascination with grandeur and eccentricity. You sense that for you, it doesn't matter. Compliance is survival, observation is protection, and attention to detail is a quiet act of resistance. You pass a small stable doorway and overhear a fellow slave recounting the story of a horse that had startled during an unexpected inspection. The punishment, not for the animal, but for the attendant responsible. The lesson is clear. Mistakes are never isolated. Responsibility is always transferred. A fleeting joke escapes your lips silently. The idea that a horse could outrank a senator seems absurd, and yet, in this palace, absurdity is reality. You stifle a laugh quickly, mindful of the ears that might hear and the consequences of amusement in the wrong moment. By the end of your shift, your hands are raw from grooming, your senses on high alert, and your mind racing with the constant calculations of who to watch, where to step, and when to remain still. Even here, in the supposedly tranquil stables, survival is a continuous act of performance, a delicate balance of obedience, observation, and subtle intelligence. As you leave the stables, the smell of hay and horses fades into the stone corridors, but the lessons linger. every space in the palace, no matter how mundane or luxurious, is a theater. And in every theater, your life is both the performance and the audience. You trudge toward the outer courtyards as twilight settles over the palace, painting the marble and stone in shades of violet and gold. The air here is cooler, carrying a faint scent of garden herbs mixed with dust from the streets beyond. At first glance, the courtyards appear peaceful, almost meditative, but the lessons of the palace have taught you that appearances are deceptive. Every shadow could conceal a watchful eye. Every whisper could be overheard, and every step must be measured. Historians still argue whether the emperor used these open spaces for public display, private entertainment, or psychological games. From your perspective, it doesn't matter. Survival here demands constant vigilance, anticipation, and adaptability, regardless of the setting. A quirky detail comes to mind. Some sources suggest that Caligula had fountains rigged to spurt unexpectedly, not only for amusement, but to test the reflexes of nearby servants. You shiver at the thought, imagining the spray soaking a robe, a servant flinching, and the emperor's laughter echoing like a warning. Every fountain, every stone, every corner is another potential test or trap. As you move along the perimeter, you notice subtle alliances forming among the slaves. Quiet nods, shared glances, and barely perceptible hand signals indicate areas that are temporarily safe or routes to avoid. Knowledge is survival here. Information is more valuable than a tray of gold or even a favor from a eunuch. Caligula appears suddenly, his silhouette framed by the fading light, a cloak of purple and gold catching the last rays of the sun. He surveys the courtyards with a casual authority that belies the meticulous attention he demands. His eyes flick over each slave, each attendant, each subtle gesture, and you know that a single lapse in posture, glance, or tone could become tomorrow's anecdote. Historians still debate whether his frequent appearances in open spaces were meant as public displays of power or intimate psychological exercises. Regardless, you understand one principle: visibility equals vulnerability. Being watched is a constant stress, even in spaces designed to feel free. A fleeting, almost comical incident occurs. A servant carrying a tray of fruit stumbles slightly over uneven paving stones. The emperor's laughter rings out, sharp yet oddly melodic. You inhale slowly, reminding yourself that humor here is both a weapon and a shield. Observing recovery rather than perfection is often the key to surviving these moments. You pause at a small herb garden in the courtyard, inhaling the faint scent of rosemary and thyme. For a moment, you imagine these herbs as symbols of control, subtly reinforcing the palace's power over life and growth. A fellow slave gestures silently, indicating which paths are safe, and you follow, understanding the unspoken rules of movement. A fringe anecdote surfaces. Some chroniclers claim that Caligula sometimes had slaves enact miniature battles or theatrical performances in the courtyards, turning everyday tasks into spectacles of obedience and cleverness. You try not to imagine yourself in one of these performances, though your mind flickers with possibilities and consequences alike. The light fades further, and torches are lit, casting long, flickering shadows across the stone. Each shadow seems alive, moving with the rhythm of the palace. You notice that even in open spaces, the environment is engineered to keep you alert, to test your senses, and to remind you constantly that freedom is an illusion here. Historians still argue whether these courtyard rituals were purely for amusement, political signaling, or psychological training. For you, the takeaway is simpler. Awareness, adaptability, and quiet observation are survival tools as crucial as any physical skill. By nightfall, the courtyards are filled with a mixture of shadows, torchlight, and the faint hum of whispered conversation. You watch carefully as the emperor departs, noting patterns, memorizing subtle behaviors, and storing mental maps of each corner and pathway. Here, you learn once again that the palace's lessons extend beyond the marble halls and gilded chambers. Even open air is a classroom, and vigilance is the curriculum. As you prepare to leave, you take a final glance at the fading light, the dancing shadows, and the flickering torches. Survival in Caligula's palace has taught you more than obedience. It has taught you the delicate art of perception, the subtlety of timing, and the quiet strength of watching, waiting, and moving with intention. Every step, every glance, every breath is both a lesson and a strategy, the invisible threads by which your life here is held together. You trudge back through the inner corridors, the palace now dimly lit, shadows stretching long across the marble floors. The echo of your own footsteps seems louder tonight, mingling with distant murmurs and the occasional scrape of sandals from other slaves. It's quieter than earlier, yet the tension hangs like a heavy fog. Even when the halls are nearly empty, you know that the palace itself watches walls and floors as attentive as any human eye. Historians still argue whether the late-night palace hours were meant for reflection or subtle intimidation, but you don't pause to ponder. Your focus is on survival, on memory, on staying unseen while performing precisely as expected. A fringe detail flickers in your mind. Some chroniclers claim that Caligula would occasionally wander unseen passages at night, listening for whispers or laughter, testing attentiveness. You imagine stepping lightly, holding your breath, a phantom among ghosts. Each corner could hold a laugh or a reprimand, each shadow a silent observer. As you pass the familiar banquet hall, you notice remnants of the day's feasts, overturned goblets, crumbs scattered across the floor, a faint scent of wine and roasted meat. Even these small traces seem to whisper reminders that every detail is significant, every lapse potentially noted, and every action silently graded. You recall earlier lessons in the baths, gardens, and stables. The repetition is inescapable, yet necessary for survival. You pause in a small alcove, leaning against the cool stone. Your hands are tired, your mind alert, yet craving reprieve. You watch a servant, barely older than yourself, adjusting a curtain with trembling fingers, and you sense the unspoken solidarity, each of you navigating a web of fear, protocol, and subtle theater. Historians still debate whether Caligula's erratic behavior was a product of mental instability, political strategy, or both. From your vantage, the distinction is less critical than the strategies you've developed: observation, timing, invisibility, and restraint. A quirky, almost ironic thought surfaces, even here, among the tension and the shadowed corridors. You recall tales of servants who attempted secret dances or whispered jokes when the emperor's gaze was elsewhere. Humor, even tiny, clandestine humor becomes a small rebellion, a thread of humanity in a world designed to strip it away. You trudge past the sleeping quarters, careful to avoid waking anyone unnecessarily. The faint scent of oil lamps, sweat, and linen fills the air. You remind yourself of lessons learned in every chamber, the baths, the library, the stables, each environment demanding awareness, precision, and an almost instinctive reading of human behavior. Historians still argue whether the palace's daily rhythms were intentionally grueling or simply a reflection of imperial excess. You know the truth in practice. Every hour, every task, every glance is a test of composure. Survival is mastery of subtlety, patience, and anticipation. You finally reach your temporary quarters, a small, sparsely furnished room tucked deep within the palace walls. Sitting down, you feel the exhaustion in your muscles and the tension in your mind begin to ease slightly. Yet even in solitude, the palace's lessons linger: invisibility, attentiveness, memory, and patience. You close your eyes briefly, letting the faint hum of distant torch flames and muted voices be a lullaby of sorts. A final reflection drifts through your thoughts. The palace is both theater and trap, luxury and prison, beauty and terror. Each day, each task, each command has shaped your awareness, honed your survival instincts, and taught lessons impossible to learn elsewhere. You realize that resilience here is not just about obedience. It is about anticipation, subtlety, and the quiet strength of understanding the rhythms of power. As you lie back, allowing the weight of the day to settle, you remember the tiny victories, moments of humor, subtle communication with fellow slaves, fleeting glimpses of freedom in knowledge or observation. They sustain you in this palace, a sanctuary of survival built on vigilance, wit, and endurance. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let your body relax slowly into the quiet. You've walked through corridors of marble and shadow, gardens of perfume and vigilance, baths that shimmer with both water and fear, and stables that echo with hooves and whispered lessons. Each memory lingers, but you can let it soften, fade gently into the night. Imagine yourself breathing slowly in and out, each inhale filling you with calm, each exhale releasing the tension carried from the day. The palace is vast, overwhelming, and yes, terrifying in its excess, but now it exists only in your mind, a story you observed, not a prison you inhabit. You can leave behind the gaze of the emperor, the calculated laughter, the sudden tests, and allow your thoughts to drift like clouds across open courtyards, free and unmonitored. Even the moments of tension, the small victories, and the whispered jokes you remembered become comforting now. They remind you that awareness and patience, subtlety and quiet humor can carry you through even the strangest, most intimidating environments. You survived alongside shadows and mirrors, fountains and statues, and your mind has gathered the lessons of endurance, observation, and resilience. Let the scents, the textures, the distant echoes of a palace long past drift into something soft and distant. The marble corridors, the gardens, the baths, and stables exist only as imagery now, dissolving into gentle thoughts. Feel the weight in your body ease, the mind unwind, the heartbeat slow. Inhale one final deep breath and let the palace fade entirely. You carry only the memory of survival, subtle humor, and quiet observation, a story of endurance, now a lullaby to ease you into calm sleep, sweet dreams.